Hello, this is Mrs. Visconti with a story about Abigail Adams for Women's History Month. Chapter 1, The Second First Lady. Abigail Adams sat in a dimly lit room in her home in Quincy, Massachusetts. She was wearing a basic house dress. The tan color displayed the wear and tear of daily life for a woman in 1797. She reached out her hand to take the trembling hand of the elderly woman before her. The woman was her mother-in-law, Susanna Boylston Adams Hall, and she was dying. Abigail's husband, John, was in Philadelphia while Abigail tended to his mother. He was accepting his election as the second president of the United States of America. This made Abigail the second First Lady of a brand new nation. From this day forward, she knew their lives would be changed forever. We have a text feature on the left-hand side. This is Abigail Adams, who became First Lady on March 4th, 1797. Abigail was born in 1744 in Weymouth, Massachusetts. At that time, most girls did not receive a formal education. Abigail did not attend school, but her parents still encouraged her to learn to read and write. One night, Abigail put on her favorite dress and went into a town for a social event. She was 17 years old. A young man named John Adams noticed her. The two talked and connected over their mutual love of reading. 3 years later, John and Abigail were married. Abigail loved John's personality. He was a lawyer and she constantly debated with him. Soon, Abigail became John's most trusted advisor on all topics. In the 1760s, Britain ruled over the American colonies. As he worked as a lawyer, John also had worked to build the revolution against England. Now he was about to be sworn in as the president of a newly freed nation. Abigail sat holding her mother-in-law's hand in the dark. She knew that her husband would need her now more than ever. We have a text feature on the left-hand side. Girls of Abigail's time were typically not allowed to go to school. Instead, they learned to keep a household. On the right-hand side, we have a quote from Abigail Adams. "Learning is not obtained by chance. It must be sought for with ardor and attended to with diligence." Chapter 2, Defender of Women's Rights. It was March 1776. Abigail sat at her desk at home. The spring sunlight shone through the window. Her young daughter played happily on the floor behind her. Abigail sharpened a quill. She dipped the tip into her pot of black ink. John was in Philadelphia with the Continental Congress, and she wrote to him with some advice. "I long to hear that you have declared an independency, and by the way, the new code of laws which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands." We have a text feature on the left-hand side. John Adams, along with other founding fathers, helped to create the government of the United States. "Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." Abigail knew that she had been lucky. She lived in a time when most girls did not receive any formal education. Yet her family had supported her desires to read and learn. However, as an adult, Abigail still lived in a time period when women had few rights. Abigail had no voting powers. She could not hold political office. She even had very few rights to own property. Abigail wrote more letters to her husband, and she wrote them to anyone who would read about her ideas on education of women. Abigail believed that young boys needed to grow into responsible adults. They were to be leaders of a nation. In order for this to happen, the women who raised them needed to be educated as well. Abigail knew that women were more than caretakers. There's a text feature on the left. Abigail had a large impact on raising awareness of women's lack of rights in the 1700s. A statue of her and her son John Quincy stands in Quincy, Massachusetts. There is a quote from Abigail Adams on the right-hand side. "If we mean to have heroes, statesmen, and philosophers, we should have learned, educated women." Women not only raised children, but also handled their husbands' finances as well. Some women even had jobs while their husbands were away. Abigail joined forces with other early feminists, such as writer Judith Sargent Murray. These women worked to create a movement towards equal rights. Abigail wanted to create a system for the education of women. She believed in equal rights in voting and property. Abigail also wanted to see slaves freed. She believed that freedom and education were not meant for a select few. Abigail spoke out on these issues. She often tried to use John's power to create change. We have a text feature on the right. Women in New Jersey could vote in 1776. It took another 144 years for women in all states to be able to have the same right. Chapter 3, Mrs. President. Abigail stepped off a ship and onto the dry land for the first time in more than 5 weeks. It was 1784. Abigail's legs wobbled a bit as she got used to the sudden lack of motion. She wore her finest dress, which had been carefully packed away for the trip. Finally, she was in France. John had been here for a diplomatic mission. They had been apart for nearly 5 years. Throughout their marriage, John and Abigail Adams exchanged many letters. These were more than just letters of affection or news of the day. They were letters between two confidants. They trusted each other. John sought out Abigail's advice on many political matters. He valued her opinion greatly. When John was inaugurated in 1797, Abigail's status with her husband did not change. She continued to advise him on many matters. Some other officials resented her position. They began to refer to her as Mrs. President. They wanted to imply that she had made more decisions than her husband. Abigail did not always tell John what he wanted to hear, but she always gave her honest opinion. From 1798 to 1800, John had to deal with the Zizix affair. This was a disagreement with France that threatened to become a war. John wished for a peaceful resolution, but Abigail disagreed with him. She thought the United States should declare war on France. However, the country stayed at peace. We have a text feature on the right. Abigail continued to speak up for women's rights until her death in October 1818. Abigail, however, did not always disagree with her husband. There were many times when the two agreed. Whether Abigail agreed or disagreed with her husband, John always respected her opinion. He always wanted to know what Abigail thought about an issue. As the second First Lady, Abigail Adams proved that the position could involve much more than just being a president's wife. Abigail was a powerful force in the political world of the 1700s. We have a text feature on the left. Some of John and Abigail's letters have been compiled into a book called My Dearest Friend. I hope you've enjoyed this story about Abigail Adams for Women's History Month. Thank you.